You begin to change your thinking from appearances and how things look and how other people view me. Okay? Because every time you find yourself upset in life about anything that anyone else has said, what you're really saying is what you think of me is more important than what I think of me. All right? So you change from appearances to what I call quality thinking. Quality. What is the quality of my life? Rather than how does it appear to others? Now, do you tell yourself that because my friends don't like me, that means there's something wrong with me? No, that's what you have to learn. That another person's opinion is just that. It's their opinion, and that's all it is. Every time you are upset, or your children are upset, because of what somebody else says about them, including their peers, what you are really saying in that moment, and this is really important, what you're saying is, what you think of me is more important than what I think of myself. And you must never give anybody that kind of power and control over you, because they will always have it. The funny part about approval, for those of you who really want it, now I'm here to tell you that I like approval. I enjoy it. I find it one of the most exciting things in the world. I like it when people read my books. I love it when people applaud. I like it when people tell me nice things and all. I like approval. I'm the first one to admit it. What I don't do is I don't need approval. There's a big difference between wanting approval and needing approval. When you need approval, it means you become immobilized when you don't get it, from making other people's opinions more important. Now, for those of you who say, yeah, but I want approval and I need it, and if I don't get it, and so on, then understand this. The people who get the most approval in life are the ones who care the least about it. And the ones who get the least approval are the ones who are always going after it. So if you want approval in this paradoxical way that I'm talking about it, stop needing it. Stop concerning yourself about it. Ask yourself, who gets the most approval in life? Think of the person that gets the most approval, and you'll see that that person couldn't care less what other people are thinking. They're so busy being, they don't have time to notice what their neighbors are doing. Thoreau said this. He said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. What that means is that success is not something that you can get in life. Success is an inner process. Success is something that you bring to everything you do in your life. It isn't something you get out of what you do. And when you get that, and you learn how to get the junk out, and advance confidently, doing what makes the most amount of sense to you based on your inner signals and the one issue of morality, which is you never interfere with anybody else's right to do the same. Each person has their own right to advance confidently in the direction of their own dreams. And when you violate that, you're violating the principle of the universe, the essence of the universe, which is cooperation and harmony. Then success will begin to chase you. And it will come into your life and arrive in your life in amounts that you never dreamt of before. That you never dreamt of. Things will start happening to you that you would never imagine before. I'm working on a book right now that's going to be called You'll See It When You Believe It. And when you start believing in some of these principles, you'll start seeing things that you were blind to for so long. When you were back here in the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 5, when you were moving away from yourself, as long as you're moving back towards your universal essence, your harmony with yourself, your cooperation with the rest, things will start happening in ways that you never dreamt of. Jung called it synchronicity. And it's a term that we use to explain how unexplainable coincidences sort of happen in our life. And how come these things happen? I'm going to share a couple of those with you before we leave. The quality versus appearance in your life means that you get that inner candle flame working in a way that gives you quality, independent of what other people think of you. Maslow, in defining self-actualizing, no-limit people, said they are independent of the good opinion of other people. of the good opinion of other people, independent of it. They're so busy advancing confidently, doing the things that make sense, and bringing success to changing their baby's diaper, and bringing success to weeding their garden, and bringing it to the job. They bring it on the airplane so that when they run into somebody who is rude to them, a stewardess that is rude, they don't see it as an attack on them. It's just where they are, and they send them love. Help them a little bit, you know. They're kind. When somebody wants to get in on the freeway, and they're one old temptation when they were on the 1 to the 6 side was to say, oh yeah, nobody's getting in front of me. I'm getting there first. It's like they slow down a little bit. They don't have all that type A stuff of having to beat somebody else and having to defeat somebody. It's a new way of being. It's a way of quality where your harmony allows you to cooperate, and you are a part of what this whole thing is about. New way of being, quality rather than appearances. Another new way of being, very important. Living your life on ethics rather than rules. Ethics rather than rules. All these rules, all these ways of having to do things, somebody else dictates to them. Do you know that some of the most immoral acts in the world have been perpetrated in the name of the rules? These are the laws. What do you think Nazi Germany was all about? Everybody doing all these horrible things to other people. I'm only doing my job was the defense we all heard at Nuremberg. I was just doing my job. If it's an immoral rule, it's immoral to obey it. And self-actualizing people, as Maslow tells us, have rules inside of them that they could never obey, never disobey, ever. And they have to do with ethics, how you treat people. How do you think we get to where we are now? You know who Rosa Parks was? The woman in the South, the black woman in the South who said, not today, I'm not going to the back today. No way. I know what the rules are. The rules were all over the place. If you needed a reminder, there were signs every place. Colored in the back, white in the front. And she said, no, I'm sitting here. And that made all the difference. Ethics, not rules. When your children start disobeying rules that need to be disobeyed, don't be surprised. When I was in the service, they had a policy on Guam, where I was stationed, which would not allow the Guamanian civilians to shop in the PXs and the Navy exchanges. But they did allow all other civilians to shop in the Navy exchanges and PXs. But if you were Guamanian, that is, if your skin was dark and your eyes were shaped a little different, then you couldn't. A clear, outright violation. I was a serviceman. I was in the Navy. I was a communications cryptographer. They had a newspaper in the Guam Daily News, and it said, an invitation to speak your mind. And it was a letter writing contest. And they offered $75 to the first prize winner. $75. This was 1961. That was a fortune to me. That was a month's pay in the Navy at that time, almost. So I entered the contest, and I knew I would win it. I had already written a novel at that time. A whole novel I had written while I was on Guam. I knew it wasn't going to be a contest. I felt sorry for the other people entering it. I knew I was going to win this. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that when you're in the service and you have an opinion and you don't submit it to the chain of command, that you can be court-martialed for that. So the headlines on next week's Guam Daily News were, U.S. sailor assails policy of discrimination. Big, hot stuff, all right? And I was called before a vice admiral, Commander Naval Forces Marianas Islands, and threatened with a court-martial because I had disobeyed the rules, even though the rule was immoral. There are lots of them like that. And when I went in and they threatened me with a court-martial, I told them this was my battle plan. They didn't have Xerox machines in those days, so I had to get a lot of carbon paper. I wrote a letter to President John F. Kennedy, and I wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy, and I wrote a letter, my hometown was Detroit, I wrote a letter to the Detroit News and a letter to the Detroit Free Press, telling them what was happening to me as a result of just expressing my opinion about an immoral act that was going on over here on Guam. And I showed the naval vice admiral my letters right there. I said, I've only sent the one to the president and the secretary of the Navy. These letters go to the newspapers across the country. There was one there to the New York Times as well, and the Los Angeles Times. It was, and I just spread them out before him. I said, if you court-martial me or punish me in any way for this, then what's going to happen is the world is going to find out about this policy. And I'm prepared. I'm ready. I can handle it. And I was 20 years old at the time, or 21. Not only did I get a blessing from that, because all things come in blessings for you, I got out 90 days early. And they stamped on my record, P.I., because the president took it up and sent it to the secretary. Must have. And I never heard from him, but the P.I. on your record means political influence. And they don't like anybody with political influence in the military. And as soon as they saw that, they said, this is somebody we probably will be giving a discharge real soon. There was no court-martial. And in September of 1962, a brand new policy was initiated on Guam, which allowed any civilian to shop in the Navy exchanges. And it came about as a result of someone saying, these rules are immoral, and therefore it's immoral to obey them. New ways of being, ethics rather than rules. And when your kids want to know why, how come these rules are so stupid? How come we have to do this? Encourage them to change them. My mother always did that. She would have to help me get out of the messes that I got myself into, because I did it in my impetuous youth. I would just, when they would say to me, what's more important, your job or school? I was just honest. I said, my job, of course. That's how I felt in those days. But what you do put out in the world is exactly what's coming back to you. And if you find things coming back to you that you don't like and don't understand, don't ask yourself why these things are coming to you. Ask yourself what you're doing to make them come back to you. And when you start putting the responsibility on yourself, you'll start seeing dramatic changes. Dramatic changes. A new way of being. Instead of rules, ethics. Another new way of being. Instead of looking all your life for achievements and externals, try living your life on knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Knowledge instead of achievement. For the sake of knowledge. Being in a context in which you don't have to collect a lot of merit badges. You don't have to collect a lot of awards and other people's value judgments. That you go to school or you go out into the world or you read or whatever it is you do because it makes sense to you, not because of what somebody else is going to put on a transcript or where you're going to appear in a class list. We need to help our children to understand and value the importance of knowledge for the sake of knowledge and doing things that make sense rather than taking the easy way. Knowledge rather than always trying to achieve. We're in an achievement-oriented society, which tells us that we evaluate and judge a human being based upon how many achievements he has. But most of the people who get caught up in that trap and are always in this circle of trying to get ahead, trying to always get ahead, their reward for that almost always is higher blood pressure, ulcers, early deaths, and even things like cancer, we're beginning to find out, are related to the kinds of stresses that we have. And remember, it's a perfect universe. There's no stress in it. There's only people thinking stressful thoughts. And when you put that pressure on yourself to always achieve and get ahead of the other guy, you miss what it's really all about. There's nothing wrong with goals. It's falling in love with them that's the problem. It's not being able to be flexible and alter them. If you have a goal to get here, to get $100,000 in the bank, to get to this promotion, to get 2 cars in your garage, to whatever it is that your goal is, and you're on your way to that, and you're always working at the goal, all of this stuff on your way to the goal is called striving, and that's what you learn, striving. And striving is a very low-level place to be. When you get to your goal, because all you've ever known is striving, you will just always suffer from this disease called more. You will just upgrade your goal to $200,000, 4 cars, and 2 houses, and another wife, and a younger one, and all of these kinds of things. If you have a goal and you understand that every step along the way is a present moment to enjoy and to live, then the goal won't become any obsession. I don't have any goals in my life. People ask me, where are you going to be 5 years from now? What are you going to be doing? What's next for you? I remember what Lincoln said, who to me was like the greatest person who ever sat in that White House. He said, I never had a policy. He said, I just tried to do what made the greatest amount of sense each and every day of my life as I sat there as the President of the United States. And I think there's something really significant in that you don't have to get it all planned out and follow a certain pattern and do it a certain way. If you just sort of trust your inner instincts and go with that and live each moment, the goal stuff will all take care of itself. But if you're sacrificing and pushing your life aside and suffering on your way to trying to get someplace, you'll never get there. It will always elude you, because once you get there, you'll just have to upgrade it. And that's because that's all you'll know. Nowness is that purest form of sanity, living in this moment and enjoying it. And all the rest of it will sort of work its way out.
Inspiration, your ultimate calling. Introduction. I love being inspired, and I trust that the idea of living an inspired life appeals to you as well. I've written this book with the paramount idea of showing you what I've learned about this magical concept. This is the most personal book I've written in my 35 years as an author. I've chosen to use examples from my own life, that is, those I've experienced firsthand. The personal nature of this book is a deliberate choice. I discovered as I went along that in order to write about such a deeply felt subject as inspiration, I needed to convey what I felt as authentically as possible. Just as one can never actually know what a mango tastes like from another person's description, I wouldn't have been able to adequately convey my familiarity with the experiences of inspiration by citing case studies of others. By writing from my heart and speaking from my heart, I've been able to keep the flavor of inspiration alive here in this program. By the way, if you're interested in why I appear on the cover of this program looking blissfully at a butterfly, you'll find out in the final chapter, How Life Looks When I'm Inspired. As I was finishing this work, I had an incredible mystical encounter with one of God's most fragile creations. In the last chapter, I've described that astonishing experience, along with what your life might begin to look like if you apply the insights offered throughout inspiration. I'm also well aware that I've repeated one theme over and over throughout this work. I decided not to edit out this repetition because I see this program as an instrument for moving you to a place where you truly understand what it means to be in spirit. This oft-repeated theme is, live in spirit. You came from spirit, and to be inspired, you must become more like where you came from. You must live so as to become more like God. One of my favorite mentors and storytellers, Anthony DeMello, was a Catholic priest who lived in India and could convert complex philosophical issues into understandable and simple teachings using the art of storytelling. Here's one of those short tales from a book called The Heart of the Enlightened, in which Father DeMello does such a good job of summing up much of what I want to convey to you about living in spirit here in this program. Quote, the devotee knelt to be initiated into discipleship. The guru whispered the sacred mantra into his ear, warning him not to reveal it to anyone. What will happen if I do? Asked the devotee. The guru responded, anyone you reveal the mantra to will be liberated from the bondage of ignorance and suffering. But you yourself will be excluded from discipleship and suffer damnation. No sooner had he heard those words than the devotee rushed to the marketplace, collected a large crowd around him, and repeated the sacred mantra for all to hear. The disciples later reported this to the guru and demanded that the man be expelled from the monastery for his disobedience. But the guru smiled and said, he has no need of anything I can teach. His action has shown him to be a guru in his own right. I trust that the meaning of this story will become clearer and clearer as you immerse yourself in this program. You have a profound calling back to spirit. It is working right now in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to these words in this very instant. I urge you to heed that calling and come to know the pure bliss that awaits you as you make an inspired life your reality. 1. Inspiration, living in spirit. Chapter 1. Living your life in spirit. When you are inspired, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive. and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. That's a quote from Patanjali. In the title of this book, I've deliberately used the word calling to indicate the importance of inspiration as it applies to our lives. There's a voice in the universe entreating us to remember our purpose, our reason for being here now in this world of impermanence. The voice whispers, shouts, and sings to us that this experience of being in form, in space and time, has meaning. That voice belongs to inspiration, which is within each and every one of us. Inspiration responds to our attentiveness in various and sometimes unexpected ways. For example, when I began writing this book, I debated between the two titles, Inspiration, Your Ultimate Destiny, or Inspiration, Your Ultimate Calling. One day, while I was swimming in the ocean, I was going back and forth in my mind, trying out both titles. Still uncertain, when I'd finished my swim, I called Reed Tracy, who's the president and CEO of my publishing company at Hay House, from a payphone to get his opinion about the title. While I waited for him to answer, the word calling appeared on the miniature screen of the telephone. Nothing else, just calling. And then the word began to flash on and off as if it were trying to get my attention. When Reed answered, I told him what had just occurred, and we both agreed on Inspiration, Your Ultimate Calling, for the title of this book and this program. All of this may appear to be nothing more than a silly coincidence, but I know better. We know that there's something deep within us waiting to be known, which we sometimes call a gut reaction to life's events. We have a built-in yearning to seek our inspired self and feel wholeness, a kind of inexplicable sense that patiently demands recognition and action. We might describe it as a mechanism persistently projecting the words destiny or mission or purpose on our inner screen. It's possible to have our daily behavior so aligned with these inner feelings that we unequivocally know what our calling is. In fact, if you pause the recording and check it with what you're feeling at this very moment, my guess is that you'll hear a part of yourself crying out, yes, I want to have more inspiration in my life. I want to know my calling. I think of the word inspiration as meaning being in spirit. When we're in spirit, we're inspired. And when we're inspired, it's because we're back in spirit, fully awake to spirit within us. Being inspired is an experience of joy. We feel completely connected to our source and totally on purpose. Our creative juices flow, and we bring exceptionally high energy to our daily life. We're not judging others or ourselves. We're uncritical and unbothered by behaviors or attitudes that, in uninspired moments, are frustrating. Our heart sings in appreciation for every breath, and we're tolerant, joyful, and loving. Being in spirit isn't necessarily restricted to the work we do or the activities of our daily life. We can be inspired and at the same time be unsure of what vocation to pursue or what activities we want to schedule. Inspiration is a simple recognition of spirit within ourselves. It's a return to that invisible, formless field from which all things emanate, a field of energy that I call intention in my previous book, The Power of Intention. In this program, I'm going beyond an understanding of the inherent power of intention, however, by describing how to live in spirit and hear the voice of inspiration even when we're doing absolutely nothing that we'd call purposeful. This is quite different from being highly motivated. In fact, it's almost the opposite of motivation. My experience with being in spirit. When I'm in spirit, I have a feeling of contentment, but more than this, I experience joy. I'm able to receive the vibrational energies of my source, call them voices or messages or silent reminders, even invisible suggestions or what have you, but they're vibrations of energy that I'm able to align with as I get myself out of the way. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of the world's great geniuses, once remarked, quote, "When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, say traveling in a carriage or walking after a good meal or during the night when I cannot sleep, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come, I know not, nor can I foresee them." End of quote. We don't have to be a genius to know what Mozart speaks of. The same force in a different way is flowing through you and me right now. I've learned to remove resistance to the free flow of this spiritual energy by reminding myself to align with it, or to be in spirit in my thoughts and my expectations. When I sit down to write, my desire is to invite spirit to express through me, and I encourage ideas to flow freely. Like Mozart, I'm connected as if it were to my source in spirit, thinking and expecting to be the instrument of my spiritual source. Ideas flow, and whatever assistance I need just shows up. And, like Mozart, I can't describe how the ideas come, and I can't force them. Staying in spirit seems to be the secret to this feeling of being inspired. I also find that inspiration flows in other areas of my life when my primary mission is like what Michael Berg so beautifully describes in Becoming Like God, Kabbalah, and Our Ultimate Destiny. Quote, "Just as every being is God's business, every being becomes our business as well." Unquote. That is, being inspired necessitates the willingness to suspend ego and enter a space where I want to share who I am and what I have in a completely unlimited fashion. At a recent lecture, for instance, a woman named Rolina De Silva approached me at the break to ask if I'd visited her teenage daughter Allison in the hospital for sick children in Toronto, Ontario. Allison had been hospitalized for many, many months due to a rare disease that's characterized by a breakdown of the lymphatic system. Her intestines had been perforated, so she was unable to process proteins and fats, and her prognosis was dismal at best. As I sat with Allison on my third visit with her, I held her hand and noticed that a scab was forming on the top of her hand from a minor injury brought about by an intravenous injection. Something came over me in that moment, and I looked into the girl's eyes and reminded her that the scab was a gift to her. It indicated that the essence of well-being, our source, was working within her. I reminded her that all she had to do was to summon that same well-being to her abdomen. "You're already connected to spirit," I almost shouted. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be growing a scab over that cut on your hand." When I spoke with Rolina 14 months later, I asked if she remembered that day in the hospital when I held Allison's hand and felt inspired by the scab. Rolina replied that that day was a new beginning for her daughter as something inside of her opened up. Always before, she'd had a blank look on her face, yet she gave off an air of intolerance about the entire process. When the girl realized that she was indeed connected to spirit, evidenced by the presence of the scab forming on her hand, she changed her attitude completely. Today, Allison is back home and actually doing work to raise money for that same hospital where she spent so many months as a critical care patient. If you ever see me speaking on television or in person, you'll notice a little angel pin that I wear, which was given to me by Allison as a thank you gift. To me, this pin is a symbol of the angel that guided me that day to speak to Allison as I did. I know in my heart that when we remember we're always connected to this source and that we can summon the well-being of God, it is then that we're said to be inspired. Whether the outcome is miraculous, as was Allison's, or our physical reconnection to our source is completed through the death of our body, we live out our moment in spirit. It's important to understand that each and every one of us represents God or spirit, revealing itself here and now on our planet. So in what direction are you moving? Being in spirit is a direction we take rather than a destination to be reached. Living our life in spirit requires us to determine that direction, and we do so by noticing our thoughts and our behaviors. Thoughts that are in spirit reflect a vibrational alignment, moving us toward our ultimate calling. And obviously, this is the direction we want to take. Once we begin to observe our thoughts, we realize that there are many times we're going in the opposite direction. When we catch ourselves with conscious effort, we can make a U-turn with new thoughts. For example, blaming something we call evil is thinking in the wrong direction. When we see things in our world that we label evil, what we're really seeing are people moving away from their source, not individuals in the grip of an evil power. To become inspired on a daily basis, we must be able to quickly identify any thoughts that are moving us away from our source and then shift the direction. We need to bring love to the presence of hatred, as St. Francis advised. When we're consumed with thoughts we've labeled as evil, we need to notice that we're headed in the wrong direction. It's difficult to comprehend because we're accustomed to blaming our problems on external forces, such as evil or hatred, but we know better. We can make that U-turn by using the same energy within us that has us traveling away from God. Evil, hatred, fear, and even illness soften with love and kindness when we're in spirit. When we make that U-turn, we make an alignment correction and move back into the space of spirit in our thoughts and actions. A Course in Miracles quotes Jesus as saying, "If you want to be like me, I will help you, knowing that we are alike. If you want to be different, I will wait until you change your mind." Being inspired is truly being like your source. If you're not, then your source is politely waiting for you to do something as simple as change your mind. Chapter 2. Your life before your birth into a body. All bodies emerge from the soul and return to it. The visible emerges from the invisible, is controlled by it, and returns to it. That's a quotation from Lau Russell. This is clearly a purposeful universe with an intelligence supporting its creation and continuing evolution. And we're pieces of that intelligence by virtue of having emerged from it. Consider, for example, that scientific analysis of even a droplet of blood reveals all of the characteristics in our entire body's supply. The percentage of iron in that droplet is proportionately the same as in that which flows through our entire body. So it's easy to agree that the drop of blood is identical to the source from which it was removed. Now think about what happens to that droplet of blood when it remains in the state of separation. It can't fortify or heal us, and it can't circulate freely. Disconnected from its source long enough, it will simply dry up, decay, and disintegrate, even though it contains all of the physical properties necessary to survive that its original source does. I believe that our transition from spiritual source to physical beings made up of particles is similar to that bit of blood in that we contain all of the same properties as our source. But unlike that droplet, we're never completely separated from our source. I know that there are no accidents in a universe directed by a source energy that creates endless real magic in the form of its creations. I know that we agreed to move from the world of spirit into the world of particles and form, to come forth at the exact time that we did, and to leave when we've agreed to do so. I also know that we decided to bring joyful perfection to this world and to share that godlike energy with everyone we encounter here on earth. It's our nature to do so. Our life, before becoming an embodiment of spirit, was exactly like our source. Then we began the transition process and became a tiny fetus intended to spend 9 months developing in our mother's womb. I contend that we've chosen to enter this world of particles and form. In ways that we don't readily comprehend now, we knew what we were coming here to accomplish, and we participated in setting this life process in motion. Why place the responsibility or blame on anyone or anything that's not a part of us? On earth, we've been given the gift of volition, that is, we can choose. So let's assume that we had the same capacity when we resided exclusively in the spiritual realm. We chose our physical body, just as we chose the parents we needed for the trip. And it doesn't seem too great a stretch to believe that we chose this life in concert with our source. The very first particle of human protoplasm intended to be ourself wasn't the architect of our physical being. Instead, it was an aspect of an invisible, formless energy field that was our self manifesting. In the particle and the energy field from which it emanated were the size and shape of our eyes, our legs, our mouth, and so on. So it feels intuitively natural to me to assume that in that field of energy, the very shape of our life was also encapsulated. You see, deep within us lies an awareness of what shape our life is to take. We can hear that voice, the one that wants us to know our calling if we choose. But first, we need to surrender to that divine plan we signed up even before our conception. Our first 9 months in form. Let's take a moment to go back to what took place from the very first moment of your manifestation into a particle, right up until you emerged from your mother's womb. Your embryo became a fetus in a space of total faith and cooperation. It had no demands, since it was simply carried along by the divine forces of nature. The basics of your development occurred without your interference. Your brain developed independent of your ideas about how it should be done. Your heart, liver, kidneys, toes, fingers, eyebrows, and every other feature appeared on a schedule that seems miraculous from this side of the womb. For most of us, it was 9 months in the hands of the source of life inside a woman's womb, who may or may not have been cooperating and welcoming our existence. Whatever energy we needed to grow into that being that we signed up to be flowed directly to and through us. This is true for you, this is true for me, for all of us. How could we have gotten along so well in those first 9 months with only the cooperation of our mother allowing us to develop inside? How could everything we required for the beginning of our human journey be so perfectly aligned with the creative spirit? The seed that we came from was so tiny that millions of them could fit on the head of a pin, and it looked identical to the seed that brings a giraffe, a palm tree, or any other living organism into the world of form. So how did it eventually become you or me? The seed materialized into what we intended to become under the auspices of the creative intelligence, and it flourished with the assistance of that remarkable spirit that's responsible for all of life. The entire process of creation simply unfolded. During those months that we lived in the womb, it's safe to say that we were in spirit. We were allowing spirit to perfectly align without any effort on our part. We were provided for entirely by a life force that none of us can completely describe or explain. We were a little larvae-shaped oozeball that, in a relatively short period of time, became a human being with the apparatus necessary to support life outside of the womb. We can see that there's a force in the universe that's 100% trustworthy, one that we relied upon to get us here. It creates and manifests from a spirit of love, cooperation, beauty, and expansiveness, and it's to this flawless work of spirit that we can return in order to know inspiration. Throughout our life, we continue our development outside of the womb, wherein we rely on the energy of creation to fuel the light of inspiration within us. Now I'd like to share a conversation I was privileged to have with my originating spirit. This is an exercise that anyone can do in their imagination. My imaginary conversation with my spirit before manifesting into a physical particle. Being in a universe that's created and guided by an organizing intelligence that precludes accidents and coincidences, I've always felt that my presence here at this time is a component of that intelligent system. In a powerful experience of hypnosis, I recreated a conversation between my highest spiritual self and my originating source, to which I'm still connected. This one imaginary exchange has been exceedingly helpful to me for the major portion of my adult life. I was conceived on the first day of September in 1939 and born on the 10th day of May in 1940. The day of my conception was the exact same day that Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. 2 days later, World War II was initiated. I was born on the same day that the Nazis invaded and occupied Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and I saw the Holocaust coming. I knew that I was to play a dominant role in reversing the kind of hatred that precipitated the horrendous actions that resulted in the slaughter of millions and millions of people. I came here to teach self-reliance and compassion, just as in an earlier incarnation in the 13th century, when I wandered through Europe and Asia with or as Francesco Bernardone, who later became St. Francis of Assisi, attempting to stop the vicious activities known as the Crusades. My infinite soul was and still is tormented by human beings' inhumanity to their fellow humans and wants to eradicate suffering caused by separating ourselves collectively and individually and using violence to settle disputes. The answer, it seems to me, is to teach others how to connect to their source and stay in this consciousness of love, peace, kindness, and oneness. When enough of us make this journey back to being in spirit, our groups and collectives will reflect the inspiration I'm called to promote in one way or another. As I readied myself to make the shift from an exclusively spiritual being into the world of particles in 1939, I had the following conversation with the creative intelligence I'll call God. God, what would you like to accomplish on this journey you're about to undertake? Me, I'd like to teach self-reliance, compassion, and forgiveness. God, are you certain that this is what you wish to dedicate this entire lifetime to? Me. Yes, I can see the need even more clearly now. God, well then I think we'd better put your little ass into a series of foster homes and have you stay there for a decade or so, where you'll learn to experience relying upon yourself, and we'll remove your parents so that you won't be dissuaded from your mission. Me, I'll accept that, but what about my parents? Who will best facilitate my life's purpose? God, you can select Melvin Lyle Dyer as your father, a prisoner, an alcoholic, and a thief. He'll abandon you as a baby and never show up in your life. You'll first practice hating him and seeking revenge, but you'll ultimately forgive him long after he's left his body. This act of forgiveness will be the single most important event of your life. It will put you on the path that you're signing up for. Me. And my mother? What about her? Take Hazel Dyer, Lyle's wife. Her compassion for all of her children will give you an example to follow. She'll steadfastly work herself to the bone to reunite you and your brothers after 10 years or so of her own suffering. Me. Isn't it an awful, cruel fate for my father? God. Not at all. He signed up for this 25 years ago. He dedicated this entire lifetime to teach one of his children the lesson of forgiveness. A noble gesture, wouldn't you say? And your mother is here to show you how true compassion shows up every day. Now get down there and participate in becoming a particle. In the introduction of my book, You'll See It When You Believe It, I wrote about finding my father and visiting his grave in the early 1970s. The facts that led me there defy the laws of logic, and visiting it was the final hurdle I needed to overcome before initiating my writing and speaking career, or the mission I'd signed up for back in 1939. I've also visited the Holocaust sites of Europe and read and reread the history of events that contributed to the hatred that created war. In the 1960s, I worked to bring peace to the events surrounding the horrible Vietnam War, and today my attention is often focused on finding an alternative to the violence and hatred in Africa, the Middle East, and particularly Iraq. My calling is deep within me and has a hold on me. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm probably being guided by what Spirit and I decided at the inception of this journey. One thing I know for certain is that I'm inspired. I've described my personal insight about my calling to encourage all of you to examine your own life, including all of its travails and success, as a necessary experience in order to fulfill your mission. Looking at life from this perspective nurtures the deep yearning within that will beckon you back to Spirit. Looking at life from an inspired perspective. As you can see from my own example, it can be a great help to look at your entire life as the unfolding of a plan that you participated in before you even arrived here. By doing so, you shift from blaming others and circumstances to being responsible and feeling your purpose. Whatever shows up in your life then becomes a part of the perfection of this plan. When everything you experience seems unwelcome, for instance, you can search for what you gain from the apparent obstacles. If we can remember that we're responsible for what we're attracting, we can then eliminate the negative energy we wallow in. If what we desire is to be inspired and feel joy, but the opposite keeps showing up, rather than cursing fate, we can view ourselves as simply being out of creative vibrational alignment. We can shift our vibrations in the form of thoughts to those that are more harmonious with our desires, and we can then begin to take the small steps necessary for our inspiration to be sensed. Source energy will cooperate with us when we seek it energetically. Moreover, we can begin to reassess our lives for misaligned attractions and imagined bad luck. When we feel peaceful within ourselves, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage Spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. Regardless of what goes on in the world of form, inside of ourselves, we'd still be living in Spirit. For example, a beggar on a street corner may have agreed to come into this world of boundaries to teach and generate the awareness that leads to more compassion in this world, or even to teach a single person, perhaps you, to become more compassionate. In an infinite universe, there's no time restrictions on how many lifetimes we get. With an infinity before us, spending one lifetime teaching compassion doesn't seem so outrageous. When we feel peaceful within, we begin to attract more of the peace we desire because we're functioning from a spiritual place of peace. When we engage Spirit, we regain the power of our ultimate source. An inspirational attitude is less judgmental and more appreciative, with a keen eye for how God or source energy manifests. And remember, source can't be removed from what it creates. Everyone and everything contains God or the source, so be on the lookout for the God force in every living thing. Explore how this force has delivered to us many blessings in disguise. We came from a world of pure spirit and allowed that source to take over without any interference or questioning on our part. As long as we were in spirit, our source materialized in a multitude of ways to handle everything for us. Then, almost immediately after our birth into form, we initiated a program to deny spirit and emphasize the ego. But now, as you listen to these words, you're on the threshold of dropping ego identity and returning to a life where inspiration awaits you. Chapter 3. Why we left our full-time spiritual identity behind. Quote, "A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct," unquote, from A Course in Miracles. I love that. A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct. We now understand that we were created out of spirit, so it must be a part of us. We also realize that for 9 months, we totally trusted in this originating spirit, and all that we needed was provided for. And then we arrived as a pure representation of spirit. So why did most of us trade in the spiritual identity card for one that wants us to believe in things that are non-existent where we came from, such as suffering and fear, anxiety, limits, and worries? The answer lies in understanding why we left behind our full-time participation in the world of spirit. I've used the term full-time to signify that we're always connected to spirit, even when we think and behave in ways that don't reflect spiritual consciousness. What I'm offering here in this program is the awareness that we can return to a full-time position of inspiration, which is the true meaning of our life. Inspiration can be cultivated and be a driving enthusiasm throughout life, rather than showing up every now and then and just as mysteriously disappearing, seemingly independent of our desire. And it's everyone's divine birthright. That is, it isn't reserved for high-profile creative geniuses in the arts and sciences. The problem is that from birth, we're gradually taught to believe exclusively in the world ruled by club ego, and we put our full-time membership in club spirit on hold. Our initiation into club ego. When we arrive in this physical world, we're immediately cared for by well-meaning folks who've been taught to believe in the illusion of what Patanjali called the false self. They think that they're not defined by the spiritual essence from which they came, but by their uniquely special individuality, their possessions, and their accomplishments. They see themselves as separate from each other, from what's materially missing in their lives, and from God. You can see why the word ego is often referred to as an acronym for edging God out, EGO. Ego, you see, is an idea that we acquire from our clogged environment, which is stuffed full of ego-dominated folks. I'm not using the word ego to describe overly self-important people who thrive on nauseating delusions of grandeur. Rather, I mean it as a catch-all term for defining identification with the false self. Very early on, ego tells us that we're separate from everyone else, directly contradicting spirit, which reminds us that we share the same life force with everyone. Ego nags us to compete and insists that we've failed when others defeat us or have more than we do. And more than anything else, ego fears our living an inspired life because then we'll have no need for it. As we progressed through our developmental years, we weren't trained to stay in spirit. Quite the opposite. We were constantly reminded that we were what we did in life, and failure to accomplish the kind of life that others saw for us meant that we should feel dejected. Our culture wanted us to learn early that we are what we acquire, and if we have or want very little, then we are very little value. Furthermore, we are what others think of us, so if our reputation is sullied, we're of even less value. We were indoctrinated in these lessons by family, church, community, school, the media, and even strangers. These ego-dominated edicts were force-fed to us and allowed to mute the deep inner voice that beckoned us to remember why we're here. Eventually, we learned to ignore those in-spirit murmurs and replace joy, contentment, and bliss with an emphasis that wonders, what's it all about? We opted to fit in, chasing someone else's dream and counting up our earnings and possessions to measure our level of success. The nagging feeling that resulted is the result of relinquishing our true spiritual self as an active participant in this life. But take heart, it never left us and is alive within us today. Ego's dominating messages. We can start returning to being in spirit by examining what ego has accomplished in our life, as well as making a determined effort to resist the powerful pressures of our culture's ego in favor of an inspired life. Ego is just an illusion, so ask yourself if you wish to continue to be controlled by something that isn't true, or would you rather look into what's real and never changes? Keep in mind that spirit is fixed, permanent, and infinite, while ego comes and goes with the wind. To continue on with this discussion, I've adopted the following list from a fascinating book called The Disappearance of the Universe, published by Hay House in 2004 by Gary Renard, which gives an account of two spiritual visitors teaching Gary the significance of A Course in Miracles. Whether you accept the premise or not is your option. I find these teachings to be profound, and they merit consideration. Number 1, the ego says you're a body. The Holy Spirit says you're not even a person. You're just like me, your source of being. This teaching shows that our ego insists we're impermanent, which is opposed to our being what Lao Tzu taught, that which never changes. That's what we are, that which never changes. Lao Tzu was a 6th century BC mystical spiritual teacher and author of the Tao. When we think about our life here on earth, we can't avoid the awareness that everything we experience, including our body, returns to dust to be recycled by spirit. Our ego finds this concept impossible to accept. 2, the ego says your thoughts are very, very important. The Holy Spirit insists only thoughts you think with God are real. Nothing else matters. This teaching explains that thoughts centering on ourselves, appearance, possessions, fears, or relationship problems are not only unimportant, they're not real. Ouch! The ego flinches at such commentary. But if we examine these thoughts from Spirit's infinite perspective, we see that we're indeed unreal. When we're totally immersed in Spirit, we only had thoughts of Spirit because that's all we were. When we left it behind, we opted for thoughts that our ego told us were important. A Course in Miracles tells us that we didn't even have to think in heaven because we were thought by God. So we can access permanent inspiration by letting ourselves once again be thought by God and achieve a state of heaven on earth. 3, your ego says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. The Holy Spirit asserts, God only gives and never takes away. When living an inspired life, we're focused on giving our life away and simultaneously observing how it's returned, thus fortifying the idea of what goes around comes around. Ego is constantly telling us to be fearful about losing what we have and warning us of greedy others who will take what's ours. But God doesn't take away from us. As we learn to think this way, we attract more of what's missing in our life. The reason for this is simple. We become what we think about. If we think about giving, like God does, the universe will provide. If we think about things being taken away, then that's what we'll attract. 4, the ego says there's good and bad. The Holy Spirit maintains there's nothing to judge because it isn't real in the first place. When we accept the ego identification card, we agree to judge almost everyone and everything in terms of good or bad. The problem with this is that we all contain the same spirit from which we originated. If I make you bad and myself good, for instance, I deny the presence of spirit in you, whom I elected to judge. God sees it quite differently. Our spiritual source knows that only it is real. All of the ephemeral world of form and boundaries is not of its infinite nature. At our core, the place where we all originated from and return to, there's no one and nothing to judge. This takes some time to get used to, but once we grasp the truth of this observation, we're free to tap into authentic inspiration. 5, the ego directs love and hate toward individuals. The Holy Spirit's love is nonspecific and all-encompassing. Ego directs us to love some, be indifferent toward many, and hate all others. When we learn to be back in spirit on a full-time basis, we discover what we knew in our pre-ego time. There's no they. There's only one. The one source of all-encompassing love knows nothing of boundaries, differing customs, geographic divisions, family splits, or differences in race, creed, sex, and so on. It only knows love for all. Jesus points so perfectly to the differences between ego and spirit. When we were in spirit, we were a child of our Father in heaven. And, quote, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. Matthew 5:45. This, of course, means that it's all one. Evil, good, righteous, and unrighteous are all the same. Some move away from the Father and some move toward him. This is such an important and powerful lesson to get as we move toward becoming inspired by living in spirit. 6. The ego devises clever reasons why we should continue to listen to its selfish counsel. The Holy Spirit is certain that at some point we'll turn toward it and ultimately return. Ego will tout its irresistible logic to assure us that our body, our possessions, and our achievements are all very real and important. It convinces us by insisting that what's real is what we can see, touch, hear, taste, and smell. Therefore, invisible spirit isn't real. So ego continues to be attached to stuff and to make the acquisition of money and power a lifelong objective. To that end, it wants us to disdain forgiveness in favor of seeking revenge. Very persuasive logic when we look around and see almost everyone doing just that. Through the lens of inspiration, however, we're able to see how ego has distorted the message of the Holy Spirit. Instead of seeking revenge, we're more likely to see a very sad nation of strivers and virtually no arrivers, a gaggle of pill poppers searching outside of themselves for a resolution to their depressing, anxiety-filled, joyless, and often lonely lives. As we return to the Holy Spirit, we'll no longer be under the influence of ego's absurd counsel. And 7. The ego wants us to regret our past. The Holy Spirit wants us to practice unconditional forgiveness. The Holy Spirit isn't limited by a past or a future. There's only the eternal now. Any energy we place on what transpired in the past is groundwork for guilt, and ego loves guilt. Such negative energy fabricates an excuse for why our present moments are troubled and gives us a cop-out, a reason to stay out of spirit. And thinking about what we've been or what we did wrong in the past are great impediments to an inspired life. On the other hand, when we're inspired, we're totally engaged in the now. In an infinite, never-beginning and never-ending universe, there can be no past. All guilt and regret simply serve as ways to avoid being here in the only moment we have, which is now. This is where we reconnect to spirit, now. If we choose to use up this holy instant with regrets about a past that's only an illusory thought, then we're unable to be in the joyful, loving, peaceful present moment. Cramming this holy moment with thoughts of guilt, remorse, and regret is great for ego and keeps us totally resistant to being in spirit. These 7 messages are the dominant ones the ego drones on about. If we don't listen, it will try to drown out inspiration by intensifying worrisome and fearful thoughts. I've managed to tame this annoying voice of the ego so that its influence is almost negligible in my life, and I know you can too. How I learned to slay the ego intruder. I realize that the ego's voice has most of us convinced that we're powerless to manage our own destiny. There was a time when I felt much more kindly toward the ego since it plays such a dominant role in the lives of so many people, almost everyone, in fact. But today, I see it as something that needs to be destroyed. I no longer agree that since it's in our lives, we might just as well learn to love and accept it, troublesome as it may be, nor do I believe that it serves some useful purpose. Knowing that we've been created in the image of our Creator, and therefore have the same essence and the same ultimate potential, means that ego is out of the picture. Ego denies our original invisible reality, so it must be removed and completely banished from our awareness. Realizing that ego is a traitor to our greatness is what ultimately set me free of its pull. I keep remembering that ego isn't real, even as it still protests and attempts to delete my feelings of inspiration. My highest self responds with, "But remember, Wayne, what's trying to drag you down isn't real." What also helps to keep me on track is parenting. I'm the father of 8 children, so I can recall thousands of instances of being sucked into a black hole of confusion and uncertainty with my kids. Arguments with them concerning schoolwork, questionable friendships, curfews, staying at a pal's house, dress codes, dating, cigarettes or drugs, what was right from my perspective and wrong from theirs, and vice versa, and on and on and on this list could go. There was anger and hurt feelings, sleepless nights, and of course, much happiness, joy, and contentment as well. As I look back on those years of parent-child conflicts, I realize today, in this now moment, that none of it exists. it isn't real because it's in the changing world of time and space. Similarly, I now realize that every conflict or struggle that exists, as well as those experiences I'd call good and joyful, are not real from the inspirational point of view. So if anything I experience is immediately going to fall into illusion, why not simply stay connected to Spirit through it all? While I still have occasions when I slip today, I'm able to say that every conflict I have with my mostly now adult children, or anyone else for that matter, isn't really between me and them. It's between me and God. I look for a way to be like God and stay loving, caring, forgiving, and peaceful within myself, suspending my need to be right and knowing that in the next moment it will all be gone, which is true of everything that's being played out in this illusory world. I want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting that peace means being in a place where there's no noise or trouble. Rather, it means that in the midst of turmoil, I can still feel calm. Not one of the things that I was so upset and out of control over matters today. Not one. It's all illusion fed by my ego's need to make me important by winning, being right, or coming out on top. The best way I can think of to summarize and conclude this chapter in this program is to take you back to the opening quotation from A Course in Miracles. To me, this observation helps us understand why we've left our spiritual identification. Quote, "A sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct." Chapter 4. How it feels to return to Spirit. Quote, "The aim and purpose of human life is the unitive knowledge of God." Unquote. Aldous Huxley. This much should be really clear by now. We originated in a field of energy that has no boundaries. Before entering the world of form, we were in spirit, a piece of God, if you will. We began entering this physical world first as a particle, then as a cell, then as a fetus, then as an infant, and ultimately as a fully developed human being. But our ultimate purpose all along was to experience the unitive knowledge of God, as Huxley so beautifully puts it. Sadly, when we began our human training, we were taught to abandon most of our spiritual identity and adopt a new one based on ego's consciousness or a sense of being separate from spirit. In other words, we came here from a place of inspiration and intended to stay that way. Unfortunately, we forgot to do so, and we ended up abandoning most of our inspiring notions in favor of a consensus of reality that didn't include spirit. We chose the false self, which is why we so inexplicably feel off purpose so frequently. In the West, traditional psychology hasn't wholeheartedly embraced the existence of Atman, the Godhead within humans, and our psychological and spiritual teachings don't teach us how to achieve the union of perfect yoga. For this kind of learning, we'd have to study with a teacher of yoga or organized religion. Now we'd like to reconnect to the world of spirit, while at the same time not shed the familiar body we've worn for a lifetime. That's where Patanjali's teachings come in. Patanjali was considered a saint in his lifetime, teaching sutras, the essential threads of a philosophy that elevated human beings to their highest potential. He taught about knowing God through the practice of meditation and yoga in order to attain a point of union with the Source. He also described our ability to perform miracles. These feats involved specific spiritual aphorisms and the daily practice of yoga. The remainder of this chapter is devoted to my impression of Patanjali's 2,300 or so year-old observation on inspiration. When you are inspired, my personal view of the 6 ideas presented here includes my belief in the existence of a God consciousness within every one of us. And my purpose in the next few moments of this program is to help you achieve this perfect union of yoga and live from this inspired perspective every day. Here's what Patanjali offered us more than 2,000 years ago, which is the most profound statement I've ever found on the significance of the role of our ultimate calling. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Patanjali opens his aphorism with an observation on inspiration and follows it up with 6 conclusions. These 6 key points are the basis for the next few moments in this chapter, as they describe what it feels like when we return to the world of spirit. Number 1, when you are inspired, all your thoughts break their bonds. As I explained earlier, being inspired is equivalent to being back in spirit. Before we showed up in form, our mind and the mind of God were synonymous, which means that we were free from the bonds of the ego mind. This is simply how the world of spirit works. It's impossible to have limiting boundaries or self-imposed shackles placed on us. When we're in harmony with the mind of God, we simply don't have thoughts that tell us we can't accomplish something. After all, our thoughts are of a higher energy. Returning to spirit results in a grand sense of being in tune with our uniquely divine purpose. Just imagine being able to go on and on for hours at a time without experiencing fatigue or hunger or thirst or mental exhaustion, all thanks to one factor, the willingness to be back in spirit. I've personally found that when I have thoughts of being inspired by some great purpose or extraordinary project, I let go of fatigue. That is, being in spirit somehow eliminates thoughts that send the "I'm exhausted" signals to my body. In the middle of writing or speaking or touring with my family or playing a tennis match or anything that inspires me, all bonds are shattered by my mind, and fatigue is impossible. Furthermore, matching up my desires with plans and behavior in the form of my thoughts and actions breaks down the bonds of hunger and discomfort. I've literally written for up to 14 hours without eating or experiencing any hunger pangs. Somehow being inspired allows my thoughts to remove any of the bonds that can serve as excuses not to do what I know I'm here to accomplish. This observation that Patanjali made so long ago is awesome. Why not practice returning to spirit and allowing all thoughts to be in agreement with that originating spirit? Your thoughts will work on your body and surroundings, transforming obstacles into the fulfillment of your desires. 2. When you are inspired, your mind transcends limitations. When we're inspired, we remember that God is always in us and we're always in God. So we're incapable of thinking limited thoughts. We're transcendent. We've gone beyond the world of boundaries and entered a space of creative knowing. In other words, we surrender. We put ourselves under the guidance and control of our purposeful force. I can personally vouch for this surrendering process. During my life, I've had an unshakable faith in my ability to attract money and prosperity. Even as a youngster living in foster homes, I always felt I was entitled to have wealth. I just knew there was an inexhaustible supply and that it was totally neutral, simply an energy that goes wherever it's called to go. I don't know why I've known this my entire life, but I know it even more today. A television interviewer once asked me if I ever felt guilty about making so much money from my writings and recordings. I responded, much to her surprise, I would feel guilty, except that it's not my fault. When she asked what I meant, I explained that money has always come to me because I've always felt within me that I am money. I attract prosperity because I feel entitled to it. In fact, I feel that it's actually a definition of me. Money has always come to me, and because it has, I direct it wherever I perceive it to be needed. It's simply an energy system that my mind has created. It flows to me because it's who I am. I've never doubted that I came from an energy source of pure, unlimited abundance. And because of my unshakable faith, I've always acted on this prosperity consciousness. I've never known a moment of unemployment through good or bad economic times. 3. When you are inspired, your consciousness expands in every direction. When we're in spirit, every direction is possible for us at every moment because our consciousness happens within our mind. Now, this inner world of ours, reunited with its originating essence, doesn't think in only one direction. Rather, it allows all possibilities. Our consciousness is in the absolute state of allowing. All resistance in the form of thoughts is non-existence. I'm speaking here of a feeling that comes over us when we're inspired by a great purpose, an extraordinary project. When we experience the bliss of an expanded consciousness with the unsurpassed allowing of any and all possibilities to enter our daily life. We cease looking for answers in a directional way. They don't come from someplace north or west of us, nor are they arriving from up above or impeded by something down below. We begin to feel the larger sense of life, what being a part of all is like once again. Is there any place that God isn't? And if we came from God, then mustn't we be like God? You see, we're already connected to everything we need when we're inspired. What takes place is a realignment within us that allows for everything, every event, and every person to merge in our inspired consciousness. When we re-emerge into the perfect oneness of spirit, we view everyone we meet as an ally through our inspired way of life. We feel extraordinarily guided and attract people, events, and circumstances to join us in our inspired state because our world has transcended from the elementary cause and effect, birth to death path to all directions simultaneously. We're living at maximum allowing with non-existent resistance. We're back in spirit. 4. When you are inspired, you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. In 1976, I made the choice to live in spirit on a full-time basis. I resigned from my professorship at St. John's University to teach and write on a much larger stage. I knew within myself that I was finally listening in earnest to the inner voice that chose my destiny before I was conceived. I incarnated here to teach self-reliance and to help our planet move to a more unified means of living heaven on earth. But I was here for 35 years before devoting myself exclusively to my mission. At the age of 36, I was consumed by my writing and by telling the world about my book, Your Erroneous Zones. I was filled with excitement and passion about what I was involved in. I had never felt as complete in my previous 35 years, even though I had an exciting and thoroughly satisfying career teaching and counseling. The moment I resigned from being an employee to living my dream, when I mustered up the courage to be in spirit, lives in my mind even today, some 30 years later. I found myself in a new, great, and wonderful world. It was as if a huge blanket had been removed from me and breezes were allowed to refresh me at every turn I made. The world became my oyster when I shifted into the world of inspiration. Suddenly I began receiving requests to appear on radio and TV shows to discuss what I believed in so passionately. The more I spoke from what I now recognize as inspiration, the more invitations I received. Radio hosts began asking me to fill in, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours on all-night shows, and then for a week at a time in cities across the country. I stayed with my inspiration, loving every moment, working 18-hour days, and being willing to do whatever it took to stay in spirit. Soon national shows took an interest in me, and all the while, precisely the right people showed up to teach and guide me through this process. Publicists, editors, book distributors, talent coordinators, travel agents, bankers, everyone who was needed kept surfacing. All I had to do was stay inspired and follow my bliss, in the words of Joseph Campbell. It was as if a gigantic hand was pulling the right strings. Moment by moment, day by day, I was in awe of it all at the time, and I'm still in awe as I write these words many years later and speak to you today. More than ever, I trust in Patanjali's advice, now, today, to stay in spirit. This is not to say that many obstacles didn't surface, as they continue to today. There are times when I still can't fathom why I have to go through so many difficulties. At the age of 65, I thought I was through with heartbreak, yet I still have it coming at me. A debilitating heart attack, a personal tragedy in my private life, and serious addiction challenges within my family have all been recent occurrences. Despite all the hardships that have surfaced, I've found that all these experiences are valuable because of the compassion, forgiveness, and kindness that I've developed. These so-called negative situations have impacted my writing and speaking and have caused me to reach out to a much larger audience through public television, where I offer a positive, inspired message. My lesson has been to stay in spirit and step outside my body and my life circumstances, to observe all that has and continues to flow to me from a perspective of detachment. It's not about me. It's about staying in spirit, knowing that all that comes my way is a divine blessing, even the struggles. 5. When you are inspired, dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. I know that forces exist to guide me through every stage of this program and all of my writing. When I pick up a book, I often open it to precisely the right page, and exactly what I need appears before me. I smile inwardly and say aloud, "Thank you, God. You're always there for me when I write, seemingly alone here in my dining room and looking out at this magnificent ocean." I love watching those dormant forces come alive and guide me in my own inspired offerings. I so appreciate the talents that's rested within me for so long, coming alive when I do what I know I'm here to do. I certainly couldn't access the forces if I were living at the ordinary level of consciousness that had been laid out for me by external, well-meaning forces. I can only access the dormant forces when I'm inspired. That is, when I let go of my ego demands and re-enter that magical realm of spirit. These dormant forces will come to all of us. They're actually alive and well and have been working on our behalf for as long as we've been here. Yet they appear to be dead to some because they've left behind their divine purpose, which we decided on long before we ever took on the insane ego. And 6, when you're inspired, you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. The act of being inspired by some great purpose allows us to feel the essence of a spiritual being having a human experience, rather than the other way around. Patanjali suggests that we could never even dream of our greatness because we've been imprisoned by our beliefs about who we are. We bought into the idea that we were limited in our ability to create an all-encompassing life, and we were certain that we had no choice in our own destiny. We defended our need to acquire more and to live a scarcity consciousness in which we competed with everyone else for a meager slice of the whole pie. All of these imprisoning thoughts result when we're not guided by spirit. Moving into a state of inspiration removes all of those restraining ideas. As Patanjali notes, we'll discover someone we couldn't imagine because we were incarcerated in ego's jail, imprisoned by what we now recognize from our inspired viewpoint as an illusion. The poet Rabindranath Tagore, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, writes of those who live exclusively in the false identity of the ego. Quote, "He who, in the world of men, goes about singing for alms from door to door, with his one-stringed instrument and long robe of patched-up rags on his back." Unquote. Tagore is describing how limited our thoughts and our lives are when we're not in spirit. As we move toward heeding the ultimate calling, we no longer live exclusively in the world of men. So we know that we all have greatness awaiting us. We need to awaken from the bad dream that has stupefied us in the fog of ego and live from the blissful perspective offered by being in spirit. Remember the words of Michelangelo. The greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. When we were in spirit, prior to materializing, our aim was high and our expectations were godlike. Reacquaint yourself with that vision and begin living an inspired life.